first speaker, Guy Berger, is the Director for Freedom of Expression and Media Development at UNESCO. He is responsible for the organization's global work on freedom of press, safety of journalists, internet freedom, pluralism, and independence in media, media literacy, gender, and journalism education. As a 24-year-old junior lecturer, Guy Berger was arrested on a night for corresponding with Nelson Mandela's African National Congress. He spent 2.5 years in prison. Of that, 6 months were solitary confinement. Guy Berger's understanding of freedom of press comes from real life experiences. Before joining UNESCO, he headed the School of Journalism and Media Studies at Rhodes University, Grahamstown, South Africa. He also holds a PhD from the same university. Even when working at Rhodes, he wrote, edited, and published various columns, books, journals, websites, and blogs. He has worked in both press and television and had a long-running column on the Mail and Guardian website. He was an active member of the South African National Editors Forum, SANEF, since its inception in 1996. He served as the deputy chair of the SANEF from 2003 to 4 and remained on the council of the body up to 2011. He was awarded SANEF's Nat Nakasa Award for the integrity in journalism in 2006. Guy Berger shall take us through the great things he has shouldered for journalism and UNESCO's initiatives for enhancing quality of journalism in developing countries. Welcome, Guy Berger.
Thank you so much, Manju Rose. It's embarrassing to hear you read out my CV, but of course I'm pleased to have done the things I've done. And as you mentioned, I now work for UNESCO. And I guess many people don't know exactly what is UNESCO. Maybe they heard of a World Heritage Site that is decided as such by UNESCO, but UNESCO is bigger than that. UNESCO is part of the United Nations. It's looking at these questions of culture, education, heritage, science, and also communication information. So you have all these governments that are in this club of UNESCO, and of course, as we know, different governments have different views, but they come together to say what can they agree on over here at UNESCO. So fortunately, they have agreed that you need a free flow of information, because when people are in darkness, you can get wars developing, you can get mobilization for aggression, and you can get all kinds of damage to the public interest, such as corruption, environmental damage, and so on. So the states have agreed, at least in terms of their presence at UNESCO, on these questions. And India indeed is a member of UNESCO. And India has also at one point been an active member of this special committee, the IPDC, International Program for Development of Communication, that you mentioned, Manju Rose. So I think it's very easy to say why UNESCO, especially today, is trying to support quality journalism in developing countries. And one of the examples I would give is in the context of what the World Health Organization calls infodemic. And the way that they have been promoting this concept has been to say, you get such a mix of content, disinformation, misinformation, and information that people cannot tell what is what. It becomes so confusing. So when they say an infodemic, they mean so much information, so much content, and you don't know what you can trust. So I'll give an example that I hope will be quite easy for people to follow here. if somebody says, I would like you to pay me for my particular drink that will cure you of COVID, you can say that's disinformation, because they know that this is just water and it does not cure. So that is disinformation. They're disinforming you with the intent of taking your money. If somebody else hears about this and says to their mother on WhatsApp, why don't we try and take this because maybe this can cure us, then it's misinformation, because it's not trying to cause harm. In fact, it's trying to help, but it's still wrong. So disinformation is deliberate, misinformation is more inadvertent. The people are not maliciously spreading falsehoods. Then, so you have those two. Then you have scientists. Scientists will tell you there is no cure for COVID at this point in time. So you have disinformation, misinformation, and information. And then you have journalism. What does journalism do? Journalism tells you, number one, it's disinformation. Number two, it's misinformation. Number three, this is what the scientists are telling you. So this is how important journalism is in that infodemic, because journalism is the kind of information that can go to the public and explain what is what. And the best journalism will also say, not just that this is false about the cure for COVID, but try and explain why it is that somebody is trying to steal from you by selling you this, why somebody else is making a mistaken error in circulating that content. This is what journalism can do. Journalism can promote science and journalism can protect people. So it's absolutely critical, especially now. And this is why UNESCO is very mobilized on this question, because today it's a life and death issue. So I will post in the chat here a link to a study that UNESCO has done about this disinformation, misinformation, and we call it the disinfodemic, which is specifically about those first two I mentioned. And it tells you a bit about what journalists can do in relation to the COVID period. So we know that journalists are indeed supposed to be in the business of truth-telling. Some don't live up to that standard, I'm sorry to say. Some have been co-opted or captured by advertisers, by political parties, even by their bosses. They don't do justice to being a journalist. But we always have to keep that, no matter how disappointing the reality is, we should never give up on the goal. And the goal of journalism is to try and tell the truth. Now, there are some complexities today because we don't know exactly what is true. We can know that it's false to say this is a cure. We know that's false. We are learning some areas that a mask can protect you. Here's my mask. We are learning about this, and particularly we learn that a mask protects others. But this has been something that's evolving. There are still many things we don't know if it's true or not. And so it's difficult for journalists because you don't know exactly how this thing is spreading. Of course, we know it can be through people coughing and sneezing. How much through just talking? How bad is singing? How bad inside versus how bad outside? We don't know how bad it is when you touch your phone and then you touch your face. These are all things the scientists are still learning, so we're in that position. And then again, you come to a question of policy about how governments are responding. They don't know, they're assuming certain things because you can't stand there waiting until the science decides. They're assuming certain things and they're doing certain things. And so we don't always know if policy is true or not true in terms of what they are suggesting. So good journalism will also not just expose the falsity and show the truth, it will also say, hey, these things we don't know yet. This is what maybe some initial research is suggesting, but we should be cautious. So I say that just to indicate the role of journalism in this big picture. Now, let me move on a little bit to say, what does UNESCO do to try to improve journalism worldwide and particularly in the developing countries? So there are four things I'll touch on. First is politics, second is economics, The third is the audiences, and the fourth is journalism education, building the capacity of journalists. So number one, just starting with the politics. Of course, we know journalism depends on having press freedom. If you don't have press freedom, you don't have journalism. You have communications, but it's not journalism. Sometimes they're good communications, sometimes they're bad. More often they're bad, but if you don't have press freedom, you don't have journalism, because journalism has to be independent. And so one of the things UNESCO does is really tries to promote press freedom through World Press Freedom Day. I hope everybody listening to this knows that on 3 May every year you have World Press Freedom Day. Please make that day, tell people about it, organize something about that. And then you have 2 November, which is the International Day to stop impunity for crimes against journalists, because too often journalists are attacked and nothing happens to those who are attacking them. Journalists around the world are being killed, intimidated, brutalized, particularly women journalists getting abuse online, and nothing is happening. So this day, 2nd of November, please use that day to call for the political will to deal with this issue. That's the politics. Of course, you're going to law, and UNESCO is giving legal advice. We are doing mapping of the environments of countries, and then we make recommendations for improving the law, such as, for example, many journalists are facing defamation cases, and UNESCO is trying to say, it's not necessary that a state has to prosecute for defamation. It can be a civil action, not a state action. That when there are damages for defamation, they should be proportionate, not put the media house out of business. So those are some of the legal things. Moving to the other issue, which is the economics of media. This is absolutely important. And today we see all over the world, COVID is killing not just people, it's killing media. It's killing jobs in media. This is so important. And I must say at UNESCO, we're just at the early stages of trying to address this, to see what can be done, because many places the market today is not supporting journalism. People cannot get the advertising, they cannot get the sales. There are the audiences, but the advertising is going somewhere else, particularly to the social media, which is supporting the circulation of falsehoods and not journalism. So we're looking at these issues and trying to propose policies whereby governments, donors, media institutions can find solutions to finding the money that's needed for journalism. So politics, economics. I come to the media and information literacy, and I will post another link in the chat here. So media and information literacy. This maybe sounds complicated, but actually it's very simple. It's a question of, there we go. It's media and information literacy is saying you cannot have a good journalistic ecosystem if people are not understanding what is journalism, what is information, what is disinformation, what's the difference between journalism and entertainment, what is good journalism, how to call for journalism, how to demand that there should be press freedom and good journalism. So media and information literacy, it's empowering the audience, the users, to know when is the advertising, when are they being sold stuff, when is there a particular spin that is presenting information that wants you to understand it in a particular way. They should be able to recognize that there's no such thing as purely objective information. It's always put together in a narrative. Now, some narratives, there are many different narratives. If you take the US, for example, you have Wall Street Journal and you have the New York Times. They have different narratives, but they're both journalism. They're both facts. And then, of course, you have some complete nonsense media, which claims to be journalism, but has very few facts in it. It's much more about ideology and opinion. Anyway, so that, I think, is about audiences. UNESCO has lots of programs to try and get governments to introduce in the schools programs to teach young people how to navigate and negotiate and understand media. So when you get a free service, understand that they're taking your data and they're going to sell you, advertise, and they're going to try and shape you and move you and sell you things using this data that you're giving them. That's all media and information literacy. So UNESCO, we try and intervene in the politics. We're trying now, beginning really with the economics. We have the media information literacy. I come to the last area, which is building the capacity of journalists. So I'm going to post some more links here, which I hope are helpful. The first area I just want to speak about is this question of disinformation, because this is something that is it's in the topic of this, and I must thank Manju Rose here for really offering to help us translate this little book into more languages. Already we have about 25 languages. We need it in more languages. I hope with your help, Manju Rose, we can get it in at least 4 languages in India. This is a handbook. It gives you a lot of very useful information about how, as a journalist, you can approach this issue. For example, it's got a section here on what can you fact check. And it points out that some things cannot be fact checked. Opinion. When you say, I like this or I don't like that, that's not a fact. That's about values. When you come to hate speech is terrible. It says, we hate whatever community. But it's not a fact-checkable thing. It needs to be counted, but it's not about disinformation. Sometimes it combines disinformation. Then it's a different story. Then you've got to look at the package. But anyway, this little book is in the links that I've just put. And the second thing I would say is that I also mentioned there a cooperation between UNESCO and a center called the Knight Center, based in Austin, Texas, which is a free webinar course for people about how to cover this COVID, because it's very complex. You need to know, for example, when a government is saying we're doing this well on these statistics, are they releasing all the statistics? Is it a statistic? How do you compare to other countries? What is their disclosure? Why are they only releasing this information? Anyway, it's a complicated story. So that webinar I do commend to you. And then I'd also say there's many other very important issues that the capacity of journalists needs to be built, because the world is complex. Don't think as a journalist that it's easy to do. You've got to really become a mini expert in this field. So you've got to know how to cover issues like terrorism, very complicated. Issues like climate change, very complicated. Violence against women and girls. There's a book I've put in the links in the chat. The number of types of violence against women and girls, it will shock you when you read this book. Everybody knows the problems of rape of women. That's one of the worst, but it's by no means the only. There are, I think, 12, 15 different categories of violence. If you're a journalist, you're going to cover this thing, you should actually understand all these. So let me just conclude there by reminding you what I spoke about, which is that we need to understand that we're now in the world of the infodemic. And although the infodemic is particularly bad in relation to COVID, it's not something that came just at COVID. We had this problem of disinformation coming previously, particularly on WhatsApp, even before we came to COVID. And that really underlines the importance of journalism. And UNESCO is really concerned that we can try and address this issue. How do we support the supply of good journalism at this point in time and going ahead? And what can you, as journalists, potential journalists, do about this? What can you do about these particular days on the calendar to really make the case for journalism? And what can you do to become amongst the world's best journalists, people who are really respected for your work in telling the truth in a way that will help us advance the kinds of things that we, at least in name, our governments have agreed to, which is the Sustainable Development Goals. And we've got targets in those up to 2030, and I hope we can achieve them. And without strong journalism, capacitated journalists, without press freedom, without viable media, without media and information literacy, I think we're going to struggle to make progress as humanity, which we so urgently need. Thank you very much, and back to you.